The Galactic Council Chamber was the largest structure ever built by intelligent beings. It floated in the empty space between three star systems, a massive sphere of glass and metal that could hold 10 million visitors at once. Today, only the inner chamber was in use, a circular room where the representatives of 400 species gathered to discuss the fate of worlds. High Speaker of the Empire sat in his elevated chair, his four compound eyes scanning the assembly below. He had held this position for 60 years, and in that time he had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched species go extinct. He had signed treaties that ended wars and approved actions that started new ones. Nothing surprised him anymore. Or so he thought. The human ambassador was speaking. Her name was Dawson, and she was old by human standards. Her hair had turned gray long ago, and her face showed the lines of 7 decades of life. But her eyes were sharp, and her voice was steady as she addressed the council. "The people of Earth wish to express our concern about the Dominion's recent actions," she said. "Their fleet has entered the neutral territories. They are moving toward space." Clicked his mandibles in what passed for a laugh among his species. "They do what they have always done, Ambassador. They expand. They conquer. This is their nature. What would you have the council do about it?" "We ask for a formal condemnation," replied. "A statement that the council does not approve of unprovoked aggression against peaceful species." "A statement," repeated. "Words on a screen. This is the human solution to everything, is it not? Words, treaties, agreements." Several delegates made sounds of amusement. The delegate, a being made of living crystal, pulsed with colors that indicated mockery. The representative, a massive creature covered in armored plates, simply snorted. Dawson showed no reaction to their laughter. She had heard it many times before. For 300 years, humanity had been the target of such mockery. They were the soft species, the weak ones, the builders of hospitals and schools. They had joined the galactic community with smiles and handshakes, and they had never once raised a weapon against another species. This made them a joke among the warrior races that dominated galactic politics. The Syndicate, these were the powers that mattered. They had fleets of warships. They had conquered dozens of worlds. They understood that the galaxy was a dangerous place where only the strong survived. Humans, with their aid missions and their medical ships and their cultural exchange programs, seemed not to understand this simple truth. "We ask only for the council to take a position," said, "to show that there are limits to acceptable behavior." Leaned forward in his chair. "Ambassador Dawson, let me explain something to you. They have 3,000 warships. They have conquered 43 species in the last 200 years. When they arrive at a world, they give one choice: surrender and serve or die. No one has ever stopped them. No one can stop them. And the council approves of this." "The council recognizes reality," replied. "The strong take what they want. The weak give what they must. This has always been true on every world in every civilization. Humans seem to be the only species that has not learned this lesson." Nodded slowly. "I understand your position, High Speaker. I will convey it to my government." She returned to her seat, and the council moved on to other matters. Trade disputes, border disagreements, the usual business of interstellar politics. Sat quietly through all of it, her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm and pleasant. No one noticed the slight smile that crossed her face. 3 sectors away, in the darkness between stars, a ship called the Patience hung motionless in the void. It was not an impressive vessel by galactic standards. No massive weapons arrays, no gleaming hull, no intimidating silhouette. It looked like what it claimed to be: a cargo hauler, one of thousands that moved goods between human colonies. Commander Cole sat in the captain's chair, watching the main display. He was 56 years old, with short gray hair and a face that had been weathered by decades of space travel. He had commanded the Patience for 12 years, and before that, he had served on similar vessels for 20 more. In all that time, he had never fired a weapon at another ship. He had never been in combat. His service record showed nothing but routine patrol missions and cargo runs. This was exactly as intended. "Commander," said Lieutenant Commander Diana Moss, approaching with a data tablet. She was 43, with dark skin and close-cropped hair. She had served under for 8 years. The fleet has entered Sector 7, 300 warships. They're on a direct course for the... Nodded, he had expected this. Everyone had expected this. They had been eyeing space for decades. They were a peaceful species, artists and philosophers who had never developed weapons technology. They had 8 billion people on there and another 2 billion scattered across a handful of colonies. When they arrived, they would have no way to defend themselves. "How long until they reach Pallia Prime?" asked. 18 hours at their current speed. Was quiet for a moment. 18 hours. After 300 years of preparation, it would come down to 18 hours. "Signal the network," he said finally. "Condition harvest." Diana did not hesitate. She had been trained for this moment, just as every member of the crew had been. She walked to the communications station and entered a series of codes that had been memorized, never written down, passed from one generation of officers to the next. The signal went out. It traveled through relay stations hidden in asteroid fields, buried on uninhabited moons, disguised as navigation beacons. It reached ships like the Patience scattered across the galaxy, vessels that had been waiting for years, for decades, for this command. And it reached installations that no one in the galaxy knew existed. In a city called, a power station began to experience unusual readings. The engineers who monitored it assumed it was a minor malfunction. They had no way to know that the station's core components had been manufactured on Earth 60 years ago, sold through a series of intermediaries, installed by workers who had no idea what they were really building. On a military base on the moon of their fourth planet, a water purification system developed a small leak. The leak released a chemical that was harmless in small quantities but would accumulate over time, seeping into the base's air supply. In the flagship, the Pride of Conquest, a navigation computer began running calculations it had never been programmed to run. The computer had been purchased from a trading company, which had purchased it from a human manufacturer. No one had ever examined its deepest code. Across space, in hundreds of locations, systems that had been dormant for decades came to life. They were patient systems. They had been built to wait. On Nexus Prime, the council session had ended for the day. Dawson walked through the corridors of the station, nodding politely to the delegates she passed. The representative glanced at her with something like pity. The delegate did not acknowledge her at all. She entered her quarters and locked the door behind her. Then she sat down at her desk and activated a secure communication channel. The face that appeared on her screen was that of Admiral Benjamin Hayes, commander of Earth's strategic forces. He was 68 years old, with a stern face and eyes that had seen too much. "It's begun," said. "I know, the network is fully activated. All assets are in position." "How long?" "The home system will be first. 12 hours. Their military installations will follow. Their fleet." He paused. "The fleet will be last. We want them to know. We want them to understand what's happening before the end." Closed her eyes for a moment. She had worked toward this day for 40 years. She had smiled and shaken hands and signed treaties, knowing what was coming, knowing what she was really doing. Sometimes she wondered if she was still human after all these years of deception. "The council will demand answers," she said. "Let them demand. By the time they understand what's happened, it will be too late to change anything." "And after the..." Admiral Hayes was silent for a long moment. "That depends on the others, on whether they learn the lesson." Nodded, she understood. They were not the only aggressive species in the galaxy. They were simply the worst, the most violent, the most eager to destroy. They would be the example. In the city of the power station's unusual readings had become critical. The chief engineer, unnamed, was shouting orders at his subordinates, trying to understand what was happening. "The containment field is fluctuating," one of his technicians reported. "I've never seen readings like this." "Shut it down," ordered. "Emergency shutdown now." "I'm trying. The system isn't responding." Pushed the technician aside and entered the commands himself. The console beeped an error message. He tried again. Same result. "It's locked out," he said slowly. "Someone has locked us out of our own system." The containment field failed 3 minutes later. The resulting explosion vaporized the power station and everything within a 10-kilometer radius. The shockwave leveled buildings across the city. The death toll would eventually be calculated at 4 million. It was the first of many explosions that day. On the military base, the chemical leak had done its work. The base's entire complement of 12,000 soldiers had been exposed. The chemical was not immediately lethal. It would take hours to kill them, hours of confusion and weakness and slowly failing organs. By the time the base's medical officers understood what was happening, it was too late. In the pride of conquest, Admiral Orr stood on his command deck and watched reports come in from across the Empire. Cities destroyed, military bases silent, shipyards burning. The orbital defense platforms around the had fired on each other, their targeting systems corrupted by code that had been hidden in their programming for decades. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Who is doing this?" No one could answer him. No enemy fleet had been detected. No weapons had been fired from outside space. The destruction was coming from within, from systems they themselves had built, from technology they had trusted for generations. "Admiral," said his communications officer, "we're receiving a signal. It's coming from everywhere. Every relay station, every beacon, every satellite in our space." "Put it on screen." The face that appeared was human. An old human woman with gray hair and calm eyes. Admiral Orr recognized her. Everyone in the galaxy recognized her. "Ambassador Dawson," he growled, "what have you done?" "What we've been doing for 300 years, replied, "preparing." "This is an act of war." "No, Admiral, this is an execution. There is a difference." On the main display, a new image appeared. It showed the home star, a yellow sun that had warmed their world for millions of years. Something was happening to it. The star was dimming, its surface rippling with unusual patterns. 60 years ago, continued, a human research vessel requested permission to study your sun. We said we wanted to understand stellar physics. Your government agreed. It seemed harmless. Admiral Orr watched in horror as his star continued to change. "We placed devices in your sun's core. They've been dormant until now. When activated, they disrupt the fusion process. Your star will fail within the next few hours. I'm told the collapse will be quite spectacular." "You cannot do this. There are 3 billion people on our." "There were 8 billion on there," replied. "Before you decided to invade them, there were 6 billion before you exterminated them. There were 12 billion colonists before you sterilized their worlds." She paused, and for a moment, her calm expression flickered into something harder. "The galaxy has a short memory, Admiral. We do not." The signal ended. Admiral Orr stood in silence, watching his son die. Cole observed the fleet's reaction from the bridge of the Patience. The 300 warships had received word of what was happening in their home system. Their formation was breaking apart. Some ships were turning back, desperate to reach there before it was too late. Others were continuing towards space, perhaps hoping that conquest would somehow change what was happening behind them. "They're scattering," Diana reported. "No coordination, complete chaos." "They're not used to being prey," said quietly. "They've been predators for so long, they've forgotten what fear feels like." "Orders, Commander." Thought about the question. For 300 years, humans had planned for this moment. They had mapped every system, infiltrated every institution, corrupted every critical system. They had welcomed them just as they had welcomed every other species. Humans were useful. They built things. They fixed things. They smiled and nodded and never caused trouble. They had never understood that this was the most dangerous kind of enemy. "Signal the fleet assets," said. "Begin final phase." Around the scattered warships, vessels began to appear. They emerged from behind asteroids, from the shadows of gas giants, from orbits around dead worlds. They were small ships, unremarkable ships, the kind of vessels that no one would look at twice. Each one carried a payload that had been designed specifically for this purpose. The first warship to die was the Vengeance of, a heavy cruiser that had participated in the destruction of the 30 years ago. A small vessel approached it, broadcasting a standard civilian identification code. The cruiser's defense systems registered it as a cargo hauler, no threat. The cargo hauler detonated when it was 50 meters from the cruiser's hull. The explosion was not large by military standards, but it didn't need to be. The warhead was designed to penetrate armor, not destroy it outright. A stream of superheated plasma punched through the cruiser's hull and reached its main reactor. The resulting explosion was visible from 3 light seconds away. One by one, the warships died. They tried to fight back, but there was nothing to fight. The human vessels were too small, too fast, too numerous. They came from every direction, and each one was willing to die to destroy its target. Admiral Orr watched his fleet vanish from his display. He had started with 300 ships. In the first hour, he lost 50. In the second hour, 100 more. By the third hour, he was down to a handful of survivors, fleeing in different directions, hoping that speed alone would save them. It would not. "Admiral," said his sensor officer, "I'm detecting a massive energy signature. It's coming from our home system." The main display showed the star in its final moments. The fusion process had stopped completely. The star was collapsing, its outer layers falling inward, pressure building toward an inevitable release. They had been evacuated as much as possible. Millions had managed to reach ships and escape. Billions had not. They stood on the surface of their world and watched their sun die, knowing that the shockwave would reach them in minutes. Admiral Orr was many things, but he was not a coward. He watched the end of his species with open eyes. "We deserved this," he said quietly. His communications officer looked at him in shock. "Admiral, we did this to others, dozens of times, hundreds of times. We destroyed worlds and felt nothing. We thought we were strong." He laughed, a bitter sound. "We were never strong, we were just cruel." The star exploded. The shockwave expanded outward at a significant fraction of light speed, vaporizing everything in its path. The was gone in an instant. The debris field that had once been their civilization spread across the system. On the bridge of the Pride of Conquest, Admiral Orr had time for one last thought before the shockwave reached him. He thought about the human ambassador, her calm eyes and pleasant smile. He thought about all the times he had dismissed her species as weak, as soft, as prey. He had been wrong. Humans were not prey. They were something much worse. On Nexus Prime, the Galactic Council reconvened in emergency session. The chamber was filled with delegates shouting over each other, demanding answers, demanding action. The news from space had spread across the galaxy in hours. Everyone knew what had happened. No one understood how. High Speaker called for order, but his voice was lost in the chaos. For the first time in his 60 years of leadership, he had lost control of the council. Dawson sat quietly in her seat, waiting. Eventually, the shouting died down. The delegates had exhausted themselves. They turned to look at the human ambassador, and in their eyes saw something she had never seen before. "Fear." "Ambassador Dawson," said, his voice strained, "the council demands an explanation." Rose from her seat and walked to the center of the chamber. She moved slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch. "For 300 years," she began, "humanity has been part of this council. We have signed treaties, honored agreements, provided aid to those in need. We have been mocked for our peaceful ways. We have been dismissed as weak, as soft, as prey for stronger species." She paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled delegates. "We allowed this perception to continue. We encouraged it. Because while you were laughing at us, we were watching you, learning your systems, understanding your weaknesses, placing our people in positions where they could access your most critical infrastructure." A murmur ran through the chamber. "Every medical ship we sent to your worlds carried more than doctors. Every trade agreement we signed gave us access to your markets, your supply chains, your technologies. Every cultural exchange brought our people to your worlds and taught them how you lived, how you thought, how you fought." His voice hardened. "We have spent 3 centuries building a network of systems capable of destroying every aggressive species in this galaxy. Though we're simply the first demonstration." The delegate rose, her crystalline form pulsing with agitated colors. "This is monstrous. You have condemned billions to death." "The condemned themselves," replied. "They had 300 years to change, 300 years to stop conquering, stop destroying, stop exterminating species weaker than themselves. They chose not to. They made their choice, and we have made ours." "And what of us?" the delegate demanded. "Though we're not the only aggressive species in this galaxy, are you planning to destroy us all?" "Turn to face him. That depends entirely on you." The chamber fell silent. "Humanity does not seek conquest," continued. "We do not want to rule the galaxy. We want to live in a galaxy where peaceful species can exist without fear of extermination. They made that impossible. They are gone now. The question is whether other species will learn from their example." She looked at each delegate in turn. "They have committed atrocities. They have conquered worlds. The Syndicate has enslaved billions. Every aggressive species in this chamber has blood on their hands." Mandibles clicked nervously. "Are you threatening us?" "I am informing you of reality," said. "The same systems that destroyed the exist in your space, in your cities, in your fleets. They have been there for decades waiting. You cannot find them. You cannot disable them. You can only choose what happens next." "And what are our choices?" "Simple, stop. No more conquests, no more exterminations, no more treating peaceful species as prey. Honor your treaties. Resolve disputes through negotiation. Become the civilization you have always pretended to be." "And if we refuse?" Smiled, and for the first time, the council saw the predator behind the pleasant expression. "Then you will learn what the learned. Humans are patient. We can wait another 300 years if necessary, but we will not wait forever." She returned to her seat and sat down, folding her hands in her lap. The council chamber remained silent for a long time. On board the Patience, Cole received word that the operation had been completed. Every warship had been destroyed. There was gone. Their colonies were either destroyed or surrendering to local authorities. A species that had terrorized the galaxy for 200 years had ceased to exist in less than 12 hours. "It's done," Diana said quietly. Nodded, he should have felt something triumph, perhaps, or relief, or even guilt. Instead, he felt only a deep weariness. He had trained for this his entire life, and now it was over. "What happens now?" Diana asked. "Now we wait," replied. "We watch, we see if the others have learned." "And if they haven't?" Was quiet for a moment. "Then we do it again, as many times as necessary." He looked at the star chart on the main display. Hundreds of stars, thousands of worlds, billions of beings. Most of them had no idea what had happened today. They would learn soon enough. The news would spread, and with it, the fear. That was the point. Humanity had learned something during their long evolution on Earth. They had learned that the most effective way to prevent violence was not to be strong enough to win fights, but to be dangerous enough that no one wanted to start them. The galaxy had thought humans were peaceful because they never fought. They had not understood that humans never fought because they were waiting for the right moment. That moment had come. Diana approached chair. "Commander, we're receiving a signal from Earth Command. New orders." "What are they?" "Return to standard patrol. Resume normal operations." Almost laughed. After everything that had happened, after the destruction of an entire species, they were simply going back to their regular duties, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and everyone would know it soon. "Acknowledged," he said. "Set course for our patrol sector, standard speed." The Patience turned and began moving through the darkness between stars. It looked like an ordinary cargo ship, unremarkable and unthreatening. No one watching it would have guessed what it was capable of. That was the human way, quiet, patient, deadly. On Nexus Prime, the council session had finally ended. The delegates had dispersed to their quarters, each one processing what they had learned in their own way. Remained in the chamber alone, staring at the empty seats. He had ruled this council for 60 years. He had thought he understood power, understood how the galaxy worked. He had been wrong. The humans had been building their network for 3 centuries. 3 centuries of smiles and handshakes and treaty negotiations, and all the while they had been preparing for war. Not a war of fleets and battles, but a war of patience and planning, a war that would be won before it even began. Thought about his own species, they had conquered dozens of worlds. They had built an empire through force and intimidation. They had believed themselves to be powerful. Now he understood that they had only been allowed to exist. The humans had watched them, judged them, and decided that they were not yet dangerous enough to require elimination. But the potential was there. The systems were in place. If they stepped too far out of line, they would suffer the same fate as the... For the first time in his long life, High Speaker felt truly afraid. He activated his communications device and contacted his government. The conversation that followed was difficult. His leaders did not want to hear what he had to say. They did not want to believe that their mighty empire could be destroyed at the whim of a species they had dismissed as weak. But eventually they listened. They had no choice. By the end of the day, the government had announced a review of their military policies. A week later, they released the slaves they had taken from conquered worlds. A month later, they signed a new treaty with their former enemies, offering reparations and promises of peace. The followed soon after, then the Syndicate, then a dozen other aggressive species who had watched the destruction of the and understood the message. The galaxy was changing, not because the humans had asked for change, but because they had demonstrated the consequences of refusing it. Dawson watched these developments from her quarters on Nexus Prime. She received reports from human observers across the galaxy, tracking the shift in attitudes, measuring the reduction in aggressive actions. The numbers were encouraging. For the first time in recorded history, the rate of interstellar conflict was declining. She wondered if it would last. Humans had been watching the galaxy for 300 years. They had seen species rise and fall, empires grow and collapse. They knew that peace was fragile, that the temptation toward violence never truly disappeared. Sooner or later, someone would forget the lesson of someone would decide that they were strong enough to defy humanity. When that happened, the network would be ready. Walked to her window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, hidden in the darkness, human ships waited. Human agents watched. Human systems lay dormant, ready to be activated at a moment's notice. The galaxy thought the crisis was over. They thought the humans had made their point and would now return to their peaceful ways. They were half right. The humans would return to their peaceful ways. They would smile and sign treaties and build hospitals. They would help struggling colonies and mediate disputes and spread their culture across 1,000 worlds. But they would also keep watching, keep waiting, keep preparing. Because humans understood something that other species did not. Peace was not the natural state of the universe. It had to be maintained. It had to be protected. And sometimes it had to be enforced. They had learned this lesson too late. Others would have the chance to learn it in time. Hoped they would take that chance. She had seen enough death in her long career. She had planned destruction on a scale that no other human had ever contemplated. She had done terrible things in the service of a greater goal. She did not want to do them again. But she would if she had to. That was what it meant to be human, to hope for the best while preparing for the worst. To extend a hand in friendship while keeping a weapon hidden behind your back. To smile at your enemies and wait for the right moment to strike. The galaxy had finally learned what humans really were. Not peacekeepers, not victims, not prey. Patient killers. And the galaxy would never forget it. In the months that followed, historians would debate the ethics of what humanity had done. Some called it genocide, the destruction of an entire species for the crimes of its leaders. Others called it justice, the long-overdue punishment for centuries of aggression and cruelty. Still others called it pragmatism, the only way to ensure lasting peace in a dangerous universe. The humans themselves said little. They accepted the criticism and the praise with equal calm. They continued their work, building and healing and teaching, just as they always had. But everyone noticed that humans were treated differently now. When a human ship entered a system, it was greeted with respect rather than dismissal. When a human diplomat spoke, Others listened. When a human asked for something, it was provided without argument. Fear had accomplished what 300 years of kindness could not. Cole continued his patrols on the Patience. He visited human colonies and outposts, delivered supplies, transported passengers. To outside observers, his life was unchanged. He was still a cargo ship captain, unremarkable and unimportant. But he knew the truth. He was part of a network that spanned the galaxy, a web of watchers and waiters who stood ready to act when necessary. He hoped that he would never receive another order like the one that had destroyed the. He hoped that the peace would last. But he was prepared for it not to. That was what it meant to be human, to hope and prepare at the same time, to want peace while being ready for war, to smile and wait and, when necessary, to strike without warning. The galaxy had learned to fear humanity, but more importantly, they had learned to respect them, and perhaps in time they would learn something else. They would learn that humans did not want to be feared. They wanted to be trusted. They wanted to live in a galaxy where no species had to worry about being destroyed, where children could grow up without knowing war, where the future was bright and full of possibility. That was the goal. That was what 3 centuries of planning and preparation had been for. Not destruction, but the prevention of destruction. Not war, but the end of war. There had been an obstacle to that goal. They had been removed. Now the work could truly begin. Dawson stood before the council once more, 3 months after the destruction of the chamber was different now. The mocking laughter was gone. The dismissive attitudes had vanished. When she spoke, everyone listened. Humanity proposes a new framework for galactic governance, she said. A framework based on mutual respect, peaceful resolution of disputes, and protection for all species, regardless of their military strength. She outlined the proposal. It was ambitious, a complete restructuring of interstellar relations, with guarantees for peaceful species and consequences for aggressive ones. It would require every major power to give up some of their authority, to submit to rules that they could not simply ignore when convenient. A year ago, the proposal would have been laughed out of the chamber. Today, every delegate listened carefully. High Speaker spoke first. To support this proposal. Other delegates followed. The syndicate. One by one, the major powers of the galaxy committed to a framework that they would have rejected without a second thought just months before. They did it because they were afraid, knew that. The other delegates knew it too. Fear was not the best foundation for peace. But it was a start. In time, the fear would fade. New generations would grow up who had never known the threat of who had never witnessed the destruction that humanity could unleash. They would take peace for granted. When that happened, the human network would still be there, watching, waiting, ready to remind the galaxy, if necessary, why peace was maintained. Hoped it would never come to that. She hoped that the structures being built today would grow strong enough to stand on their own, that the galaxy would learn to value peace for its own sake rather than out of fear of punishment. She was 73 years old. She would not live to see whether her hopes were fulfilled. But others would carry on her work. Younger humans were already being trained, prepared to take her place when she was gone. They would smile and shake hands and sign treaties just as she had done. They would be patient and kind and helpful. And they would be ready to do whatever was necessary. Because that was what it meant to be human, to hope for the best and prepare for the worst, to offer friendship with one hand while holding a weapon with the other, to wait, sometimes for centuries, for the right moment to act. The galaxy had thought humans were simple, weak, predictable. They had learned otherwise, and they would never make that mistake again. The story of humanity's transformation from galactic joke to galactic enforcer spread across 1,000 worlds. It was told in whispers on space stations, discussed in academic institutions, debated by philosophers and historians. Some versions of the story emphasized human cunning, their ability to infiltrate and corrupt systems without anyone noticing. Others focused on human patience, their willingness to plan across generations for a goal that most individuals would never see achieved. Still others highlighted human ruthlessness, their capacity to destroy billions without hesitation when they decided it was necessary. All the versions were true. That was what made them so disturbing. Cole heard these stories during his travels. He heard aliens speak about humans with a mixture of fear and awe, discussing them as if they were a force of nature rather than a species of living beings. He understood why. What humanity had done to them was almost incomprehensible. A secret plan, maintained for 3 centuries, executed flawlessly, resulting in the total destruction of a civilization. No other species in the galaxy had demonstrated such capability. But also knew something that the stories usually missed. The humans who had planned and executed the destruction of the had not done it with joy. They had not celebrated their victory. They had not gloated over their enemies' deaths. They had done what they believed was necessary, and then they had gone back to their lives, building hospitals, teaching children, helping those in need. That was the part of humanity that the galaxy still did not understand. The destruction was not the goal. It was the tool. The goal was something else entirely. Thought about this as the patients moved through the darkness between stars. He thought about his daughter, living on a colony world far from here, raising her own children. He thought about the future those children would inherit, a galaxy where peace was maintained, where no species had to fear extermination. That was worth fighting for, that was worth dying for. And if necessary, that was worth killing for. The Patience continued on its patrol, one small ship in a vast network, waiting for orders that might never come. Hoped they would never come. He hoped that the galaxy had learned its lesson, that the peace would last, that his would never have to do what he had done. But hope was not the same as expectation. Humans hoped for the best while preparing for the worst. That was their nature, that was their strength. And that was why the galaxy would never underestimate them again. The final report on the destruction of the Dominion was completed 6 months after the event. It was a detailed document, analyzing every aspect of the operation, from the initial planning 3 centuries ago to the final execution. Admiral Benjamin Hayes read the report in his office on Earth. He was 68 years old, and he had dedicated his entire life to this project. Now it was done, and he was not sure how to feel. The report concluded that the operation had been a complete success. All objectives had been achieved. The threat had been eliminated permanently. Casualties among human forces had been minimal, a few dozen operators who had chosen to sacrifice themselves to ensure the success of critical missions. The report did not mention the billions of who had died. It did not discuss the ethics of what had been done. It was a military document, concerned only with objectives and outcomes. Hayes closed the report and looked out his window at the night sky. Somewhere up there, the galaxy continued turning. Species lived and died, empires rose and fell, and through it all, humanity watched. He thought about the next generation, the young men and women who were even now being trained to continue the work. They would spend their lives smiling and shaking hands, building relationships, gathering intelligence. They would never know conflict, never fire a weapon in anger. Unless something went wrong, unless someone forgot the lesson of the... Hayes hoped that would never happen, but he had spent 68 years preparing for the possibility that it would. That was what it meant to be human, to hope and prepare at the same time, to want peace while being ready for war. He turned off his light and went to bed, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, the network continued its silent vigil. Watching, waiting, patient. Always patient.